Hello everyone and welcome. The Gabi Master Dripper B has to be one of my all-time favorite coffee purchases. This clever device allows you to put it on top of a pour-over, whether it's a Chemex, a V60, a Kalita Wave, it doesn't matter, it can sit on top of them all. You'll pour water inside the inner rings where it has little holes. The water will drip through the holes and onto the coffee. I first saw this device in use while visiting Third Wave Coffee in Toronto, and it happens to be one of my all-time favorite coffee shops. And I really just loved how simple and effective the idea was, and it has inspired me ever since to get one for myself, and I use it in the same way they did with a Kalita Wave. So let's go through a couple of reasons why I think the idea is so effective at creating a good cup of coffee. And I'll follow up at the end with some things to keep in mind and be careful about when using the Gabi Dripper. But just before that, please do remember to like this video and subscribe, and make sure you hit that bell icon so that you're not missing out on any of my future content. Many people still do not subscribe after they watch my videos, but I have to say that it really helps me out. Thank you for the consideration, and let's get back to the coffee. Alright, so the first thing the Gabi does well is consistency. The flow of water through the holes is restricted, and this allows for the Gabi to drip water onto the coffee at a very constant speed. We may not realize it, but pouring by hand, even with a gooseneck kettle, can have extremely varied flow rates. With the Gabi, every cup can be made the same, and the dial-in process of a cup of coffee can be made easier with less variables. Your coffee won't suffer just because you can't or don't want to manage your flow rate at 6 a.m. in the morning. The second interesting aspect of the Gabi is that there is very little to no agitation. As water falls onto the coffee, it's doing so in very small droplets, as opposed to a kettle where it's one single constant stream. You may ask, why is this a benefit to us? And that is a great question. Typically, as a stream of water enters the bed of coffee, it creates a slightly chaotic movement of coffee particles. Coffee is being kicked up, mixed around, and exposed to clean water, all of the things that increase our extraction. But hold on, that sounds like a good thing, right? Well, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing to use a kettle, it's just slightly unpredictable as to how the flow of water will agitate the bed of coffee. So what about the Gabi? Well, any droplets of water will simply land peacefully on the slurry, and the water continues to pass through the bed at a steady rate. It's not as romantic as pouring by hand, but I love the consistent results that it produces. The last thing that I wanted to touch on with the Gabi is how fines are affected. These are tiny particles of coffee that can negatively affect your brew, and depending on the quality of your grinder, you might deal with them more or less. They don't offer anything in terms of flavor on their own, but they act in a way that can sometimes clog your filter. Higher agitation methods, like pouring from a kettle, have more risk of moving these fine particles around and causing a buildup of them at the bottom of your filter. With a steady drip from the Gabi, we can expect less movement of coffee particles and more control over our brew. So what are some things you should keep in mind? You need to be careful about losing too much heat, because your water is sitting in the plastic Gabi first and losing a little bit of heat due to evaporation, but also losing some heat due to absorption into the plastic. Then the water is falling in small droplets, and depending on how far it's falling, you might lose a little bit of heat there as well. This is not a deal breaker by any means though, as you can just start with hotter water than you would normally use for a pour over. I tend to use water at 210 degrees Fahrenheit or straight to boiling, in the hopes that when it hits the bed of coffee, it's around 200 to 205. But I also have a theory that the Gabi ends up preserving us a little bit of heat, because it's sitting on top of the pour over device and blocking some potential evaporative cooling by the slurry. Another thing to consider is doing multiple pours. Without any agitation and with possible heat loss, you might be wondering if we are extracting enough from our coffee. The thing to keep in mind here is that there are many ways we can extract more from our coffee, and doing multiple staged pours is one of them. Every time we add clean water on top of the coffee, we are increasing the concentration gradient. This is just a fancy way to say that before the water is added, The coffee is surrounded by water that has a high concentration of dissolved solids. And after the water is added, the coffee gains access to areas of water that have lower concentration. This results in a sudden increase in extraction, as cleaner water can more quickly diffuse the flavor compounds that we want. Use all of this to your advantage and pour in multiple steps. I usually break down the total amount of water that I need to add into 3 or 4 equal portions. I let each pour almost fully drain before adding the next. Allowing them to fully drain means that each new pour can maximize the difference in concentration levels. And extraction has been shown to increase with the more pours you add. There likely is a point of diminishing returns though, and you probably don't need to do 100 pours. Overall, I've loved using the Gabi Dripper. The whole thing is similar to brewing a pot of coffee actually, just on a smaller scale. And I'm sure Scott Rayo would approve. Notice how the sides don't have any ground stuck to them either, and the bed is nice and flat. The water level doesn't build up too much, especially if you're doing multiple pours. One last note is that I typically only use the inner ring because I'm often brewing on smaller devices like the Kalita Wave 185 or the V6001. The outer ring may even hit the filter at times if you use something really small and angled down like the V60. I hope this was helpful to some of you out there, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever used the Gabi Dripper or something similar like the Mellow? As always, please remember to like the video and subscribe. I'm also on the Buy Me a Coffee platform, and it's a place where you can support me as a small content creator for as little as $1. Any amount is so helpful in allowing me to continue this channel and put out videos that you love. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video. Have a great day.